on the abuse of the benefit system. 4 million people watched that programme. So I spoke to 4 million people. When I make a speech in Parliament, I would be lucky if 40 people, outside Parliament itself, knew the content of that speech. And they're the anorex. They read Hansard. They go into the parliamentary channel. They are already intensely interested for one reason or another. The vast majority of people, including those who no longer bother to vote, they're not interested. And they are not going to go to all the trouble of obtaining a copy of what somebody said in Parliament. Sure, you'll get the highlights sometimes, if it's very controversial. If it's steady and reasonable, you probably won't. But if it's very controversial, you'll get the highlights. You won't actually get the full argument. But you can take something in a visual form. You can give it a dramatic representation, and then you can give the other side, and then you can propose tentatively some solutions. All of that, you can reach 4 million people. And I think foolish are the politicians who turn their noses up at modern communications and who believe that somehow it's an affront to the dignity of Parliament if politicians do that. Well, it might be an affront to the dignity of Parliament, quite honestly, but that's because nobody's interested in the dignity of Parliament anymore. And it's no good sitting there protesting. It wouldn't surprise the electorate if we took out quill pens. Really wouldn't. So we need to find ways of communicating. That's why I was one of the first, I certainly wasn't the first, one of the first MPs with a website, one of the first to go on Facebook, one of the first to put a video on my website. The video can be and it is the use of modern communications. Now, I don't pretend to be au fait with them all, but what I do know is that if you don't actually use what everybody else is starting to use as the norm of communication, you won't communicate. And nobody will have a clue what you think or what you're saying, or be able to pass any judgment on it at all, either for or against, because they wouldn't have heard it. So if we want to reach people, we do have to understand that while standing up in Parliament and making a speech is all well and good, the circumstances in which I do it now, when I want to put a minister under pressure, when I want to get a response on the record, usually about a particular constituency case, that is still a good use of Parliament, because the minister has to come to the dispatch box, has to defend whatever's happened in that individual case, or has to promise to do something about it. And that is still a good use of Parliament. But on the wider, the broader, the bigger issues of the day, if I simply want to be able to say, well, I've already given my views, then I make a speech. But if I want those views actually to be heard, seen and recognised, then I either write about it in a national newspaper, or I try and broadcast it through one of the mediums of mass communication. So that's a very quick cant around the course. I've deliberately kept it general, so that you can then ask questions on, as I say, almost anything. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you. But I will do my best to answer whatever you want to throw.
Right, who wants to start? Okay,
Thanks. I'd like to ask a question about the proposed Conservatives' green taxes. Do you think it's fair that just because you're extremely wealthy, you can therefore screw up the planet, well, for the rest of us?
Right, okay, let me first of all look at the green issue, then let me look at what you specifically mentioned, which is taxes, and try to address the general question. I'm a bit of a heretic on green issues for this reason. 50% of all the world's carbon emissions come from China, India and the States. 50%. And China and India are building coal-powered stations as fast as they can go. And they are virtually doubling their production. Now, against that sort of background, if you seriously think it makes an iota of difference what sort of light bulb you've got in your ceiling, you might just as well throw a sugar cube interlock Loch and say, oh look, I've sweetened the waters. And yet all the concentration recently, and I say our, I don't just mean the Conservatives, I mean the British debate, all our concentration has been on that sort of pettifogging, comparatively speaking, pettifogging solution. You know, you're now going to have inspectors going through your rubbish. You have spy chips in your wheelie bins. And this is all in the name of the environment. And meanwhile, it just pumps out from the emerging nations. Now that is daft, quite honestly. And all it is an excuse for more state interference. Take the obvious one. When you sell your house now, you have to provide an information pack. And part of that is an energy assessment, and an inspector comes into your home. He doesn't actually assess the energy rating of your house. He assesses the energy rating of you. Because one of the things he will do is to count up the light bulbs and their nature. Light bulbs obsess people. And so one person may have a low energy light bulb from the socket. Another person from exactly the same sort of socket might have 100 watts burning away. Another person might have an entire chandelier from the same socket, with goodness knows what blazing on. And what you assess is not the house, you assess what the current owner is doing. Tells you nothing. Tells you nothing. And it's the sort of idiotic window dressing that we indulge in, when the real solution has got to be international. We have to have international solutions to energy. And that in turn will make a very big difference to what we do with the planet and how the planet comes out. So as I say, I'm a bit of a heretic on it. Now, as far as taxation goes, I would ask you to distinguish. And actually there's been a big risk in doing the sorts in taking the approach that we've taken with these various policy groups. Because what we've had is a commission on tax, commission on regulation, commission on green, commission on anything you like. And it reports, not to David Cameron, but it publishes its report. And then in the full glare of all the resulting publicity, David Cameron and the shadow cabinet between them have to decide what they're going to accept, what they're going to reject, what they may be accepting but modifying. And it's not a sensible way of doing it, because as soon as the report reports, everybody assumes that's Conservative Party policy. And indeed, there was a proposal in that report which raised my hands, which was that people should be charged for parking outside supermarkets. Compulsorily charged, not just because the supermarket wanted to recover its costs. In other words, you're going to be taxed to do your weekly shop. Now, that was not Cameron's proposal. And Cameron indeed distanced himself from it and said, no, I don't think we'll be doing that. But it was a part of the report. So do distinguish, because there'll be other reports on other topics unless we're suddenly plunged into an election. So do distinguish between what a report recommends and what eventually becomes our policy. But it's quite true that one of the starkest ways that you can alter behaviour is by taxing. And therefore, no party that was serious about a particular issue would not consider that, at least as an option. But as I say, taxing people for what is a minute contribution to what is actually going on worldwide is not my idea of the way forward. I've always been a bit of a heretic on this, because I look at the big picture and I think we're being distracted from it. We're actually being distracted from it. We're not looking out, we're looking in, and we're looking at a micro level. Now, sure, encourage people to change their behaviour. The local authority to which I belong to has a wonderful scheme. You have to recycle, and you attach to the recycling a label which they give you, and the labels, which will only be taken